So I overheard someone say, whichever Christmas my parents weren't fighting, and I said, that means you still got your best Christmas memory in the future. And then I said, well, mine you're all about to hear. So I couldn't really spoil any of that. But Christmas has always been an emotional day for many of us, right? So for some of us, there's nostalgia. For others, there's grief. For many of us, there's kind of a mix of both of those feelings. For me, I've had literally all kinds of Christmas Eve memories. As a kid, it was bigger than Christmas. My great-grandma, I was blessed as a kid. I had 3 grandparents on my dad's side and 2 grandparents on my mom's side. So I grew up with a full set of grandparents. And my great-grandma Vera, who I absolutely idolized, we would have presents that would fill the entire room. And then it was just a whole family room of presents. And my grandma Mary was very particular about the order of present opening. We went youngest to oldest, and we just kept going around until 2 hours later, we had personally seen everyone open and pretend to like every gift we'd gotten. And my grandma Mary was just so excited to see the joy in each of our faces that sometimes we faked it because we didn't want to let Grandma Mary down. Later, when my grandparents had passed and my parents had divorced, me and my mom and brother would travel to all 4 of her siblings' houses on Christmas Eve and connect with them individually. So we'd have this beautiful opportunity before the chaos of a 5-kid, 14 grandkid. I think now they're up to like 35 great-grandkids and 1 great-great-grandkid. They keep populating. But anyways, we would go and have this chance to have these like one-on-one intentional connections on Christmas Eve. As an adult, Christmas Eve and my addiction involved things like getting arrested once, and my brother and sister-in-law and mother calling hospitals and jails while I sat in a holding cell. Later, Christmas Eve became a more religious, attending services and singing Silent Night as we passed the Christ candle to each one of us, remembering that it is our responsibility to carry the gifts that we have so freely onto the next person. One Christmas Eve morning back in 2023, I had a very interesting Christmas Eve service I attended. So I was between churches, and so I went to a church with my grandma and my cousin in my hometown of Mount Vernon, Missouri. They'd been attending this local church together, and they invited me to join them for the Christmas Eve service. Before we left the house, my mom pulled me aside, and she said, Seth, please don't ruin church for them. They like this church, and I know you have strong opinions on theology. So I imagine my mom knew what was coming. She didn't mean it as an insult, but she kind of knew me well, and so she knew I'd ask questions. She knew I'd notice things. She knew that when something doesn't sit right with me, my face really gives it away. So I promised her I'd behave, I promised her I'd be respectful, and I truly did try to do my best. But y'all, whenever I walked in, they were having a baby shower for Jesus. This could go one of 2 ways, and it didn't go the good one. So when I arrived, they had some traditional Christmas decorations, not fundamentally different than what we had here, but they had some other decorations too. The full decorations for a baby shower, we're talking baby shower cake. They had a little playpen set up on the stage. It was full-scale baby shower, and I thought, where are we going with this? This doesn't feel good. They had dedicated their Christmas Eve service to a local anti-abortion clinic. They had a special speaker from this pregnancy care clinic talk about how they'd provide support to expecting mothers to prevent them from getting an abortion, and they gave the support for 1 year, because everyone who has kids in here knows that after 1 year, the babies don't need support anymore. All goal with talking women out of whatever their doctor had talked them into, right? And then it got better. That wasn't even the best part of this Christmas Eve sermon, and I'm using best with some really strong air quotes. The pastor, he got up to talk about the Christmas story, and he talked about how Jesus was the perfect lamb. We've heard this before, right? The perfect sacrifice, good enough to be slaughtered on the cross to wash away everyone's sins. My stomach curled. And I sat there quietly, keeping my promise, keeping my mouth shut, saying, Seth, fix your face, which I have to do quite often. But inside, something was tightening. Not because I don't love Jesus, and not because I don't believe in Scripture, and not because I don't believe Jesus really was pretty darn perfect, and not because I don't take faith seriously, and not because I don't want babies to have diapers, but because I kept wondering, is this really all we think that Jesus is? A lamb, a setup? And do we really believe that there's a God who would send his son to be killed? Any attempt to spiritualize the latest talking point for Christian nationalism, a sacrifice waiting to happen, I left that service frustrated and spiritually unsettled. So much later that night, I got in my car and drove about 35, 40 minutes away and went to a United Methodist church that was hosting a beautiful candlelit service, and it was quiet, and the pastor delivered a beautiful message, and scripture was read, and songs were sang, and candles were lit. Silent night filled the room. And I remember sitting there, finally breathing again, asking myself this question over and over again. Do people really believe that Jesus was only ever meant to die? That his life was just a long walk towards execution? Because if that's all Jesus is, then Christmas becomes pretty hollow. This afternoon, we're not here to argue theology. We're not here to debate doctrine. Today, we are here to celebrate a birth. A baby whose mother loved him, a baby whose father protected him, a baby who was very first visited by the smelly outcasts of society, and they were amazed. A baby who was held, fed, rocked, and soothed. I see a baby in the room, and I see his dad doing just that, right? A baby who cried in the night and needed comfort. Today, we celebrate the birth of Jesus, and the Gospel of Luke gives us the most tender version of the story. A young couple far from home, no room in the inn, a borrowed space, a feeding trough turned into a cradle. They're shepherds who are ordinary people who are so excited about what they encounter, so excited that they didn't keep quiet about it. Luke tells us that when the shepherds see a child, they are changed. Not by power or not by instruction, but by presence and by vulnerability. And then the Gospel of John gives us language for why that matters. It says, "And the Word became flesh and lived among us." God didn't shout love from a distance. God didn't send instructions. God didn't send a symbol. God sent God's very self. God chose to become human, knowing full well what humanity was capable of. Knowing full well where love often leads, knowing full well that this world does not always receive gentleness kindly. Jesus didn't come to kill time for 33 years so he could be ritually sacrificed. Jesus came to teach us who God is and who God can be, knowing full well what the ultimate cost would be. Human nature is so vicious that we would incite a mob to kill the Messiah. Jesus didn't come for the sacrifice. Jesus came in spite of the ultimate sacrifice. And God chose incarnation anyways. That matters. Jesus was not sent as a setup for the cross. Jesus was sent as a gift that teaches us what it means to be fully human, a gift that shows us how to live in line with God. Before Jesus ever speaks a sermon, before he ever performs a miracle, before he ever challenges a system, he is born, he is held, he is loved, and he is dependent. Not only fully God, but he's also fully human. That alone tells us something about God. A real gift does something important. It reveals the heart of the giver. If Jesus is God's gift to the world, then God is not distant. God is not cruel. God is not uninterested in our lives. God is close. God is present. And God is willing to enter the mess. And a real gift cannot be controlled. You don't get to reshape it to fit your agenda. You don't get to flatten it into a slogan. Jesus refuses to be a mascot, refuses to be reduced, refuses to be used instead of followed in Scripture. Scripture shows us that over and over again, that no matter how much people try to manipulate him to meet their needs, the Gospels are pretty clear about the heart of Jesus. A Jesus who performs miracles not to flex his power, but to pull people into community. A Jesus who tells us things like we don't have to carry the weight of our past mistakes. Systems of religious oppression and exploitation must be broken, is something else that Jesus tells us, even if it requires us to braid a whip and flip a table. Jesus teaches us to resist an empire set on oppression, that we should center of the voices of those that society chooses to ignore. This is the gift of Jesus. And a real gift changes the one who gives it as well as the one who receives it. Not through fear and not through shame, but through invitation. Jesus changes us by showing us how to live. He teaches compassion that notices who other people pass by. Truth that doesn't humiliate and courage that doesn't dominate. Love that doesn't keep score. Jesus shows us holiness without exclusion, faith without cruelty, and obedience without fear. And this is the gift. And that's why today we don't rush. We don't rush ahead to Good Friday or Easter. We don't collapse Jesus into a single moment or a single sacrifice. Today we stay right here with the baby, with parents doing their best, with shepherds filled with wonder, with a night so quiet that even heaven seems to hold its breath. The shepherds weren't changed because they understood everything. They were changed because they encountered vulnerability, because God trusted them enough to be seen without armor. And they left different than when they arrived. That's what the presence of Jesus does. So this afternoon, the question isn't, do you believe the right things about Jesus? The Christmas question is gentler than that. The question is, will you receive this gift? Will you let Jesus teach you how to be human, how to love more deeply, how to live more honestly, how to walk more closely with God? Here at Holy Covenant, we get to explore all these beautiful things that Jesus teaches us together, so that we may be the hands and feet of God, not only to transform the world around us, but to transform our very soul. Because the real miracle of Christmas is not just that God came near. It is that God believes humanity is worth inhabiting, still worth loving, still worth redeeming, and not by force, but by example. And that's the gift wrapped in flesh, laid in a manger, held in trembling hand. That gift is still being offered today, and all we have to do is receive it. Thank you.